Okay, so welcome to our history of the Jewish people, and we're going to be talking specifically about Avrum, who later becomes Avraham today. And I want to start the conversation with a bit of understanding of the picture here. So, what we're going to be talking about is the 10 tests of Avraham. And I want to put that in context. Typically when we think of a test as, it's a pass or fail, you're getting graded, and we're going to see what you're worth. And oftentimes in the academia world, the idea of a test is more about, we want to know how you're doing. We want to be able to figure out, what you know and what you don't know, right? That's not applicable to God, because he knows all that, right? In fact, he not only knows what we can do, but he knows it better than we do. He knows what we actually can do. And so we have to take this idea of the 10 tests of Avraham, of our forefather. We have to take this in the context of, this is not about God coming to understand what Abraham is capable of doing. It's really about two different things. It's about bringing Avraham up to his capacity, what he's actually capable to do, right? And in the Hebrew, the word nisayon means a test, a challenge, right? But the root of the word is lanasais, to lift up. The purpose of a challenge in life is to raise you up to a potential you didn't realize you had. So every time a difficulty comes up, or a challenge comes up, or a test comes up, right? It's not a test of your faith. God knows this. He knows what you're capable of, right? You're the one who doesn't know. It's the purpose is to lift you up to things you never realized possible, right? And a second is that sometimes it's not about you. It's about the people around you, that they need to know either what's capable, maybe even of themselves. So they need to see someone else go through something to be able to believe they can do more, right? Or sometimes it's not just for a person or two around you, but for all of those around you and all of those in your sphere of influence, to be able to realize that a person, including themselves, might be able to actually do this. Why? Because they've seen you accomplish this. And that's the case we're talking about here. We're talking about, Mesopotamia. That's why we had, the last class was all about the time of Noah, right? And to come to understand that Avram is born into a crazy world, even crazy by today's standards. It's a crazy world, right? We talked in the last class about King Nimrod. King Nimrod was a self-proclaimed god, and he was the man of the generation in a sense of ego and power, and no one would confront him. Everyone was terrified, because in all purposes, for everyone else around them, he was like the most powerful man on earth at the time, and godlike. So nowadays we talk about world powers. Well, the world power of that time, that was Nimrod. That's who it was. And when we talk about the power of a king of life and death, totally have all that, right? And so coming into that scene is what we want to talk about, right? So on that scene, one of Nimrod's many advisors is Terach. And Terach, his day job is he sells idols. That was his investment at the time, right? And the king's advisors come to him, and they say to the king that, and they're terrified to do this, right? But they're coming to the king saying, astrologically, we see something coming in the future we feel compelled to tell you about. So let's talk about this for a second. What do you mean astrologically, right? Today's astrologers, today's forecasters, and they talk about your sign, and whether you're Aquarius or Sagittarius or Capricorn or Sagittarius, whatever. the forecasts that you see in astrological forecasters today, it's all gimmick and garbage, and there's not a whole lot of real truth behind what they're talking about, because they don't really know what they're talking about. They're playing not even in the minor leagues, right?
Yeah.
But the truth from Torah is that which is decreed in heaven is programmed. I think nowadays we can actually use languaging that's more meaningful, right? But that which is designed in the heaven is programmed through the constellations and the stars to become manifest down here in the physical world. So those who could read properly the coding that's coming down from on high, right? They could predict the future with a certain level of accuracy, because they're reading the coding as it's coming through, right? And so the astrologers of the time came to Pharaoh to Nimrod, to come and explain to him that we see a male child to be born that will outshine you and essentially undermine your kingdom, undermine your authority, totally. So, of course, this is a real threat. This is the biggest threat to his power right now, is that the astrologers are saying. So he gives a command that they're going to gather up all the expectant women, put them in special birthing homes, and every male child that is born will be killed before leaving the house. And about 700,000 newborn males were killed this way. A massive decree of the king. Talk about a power-hungry megalomaniac, right? And over that time period, 700,000 male children are killed, murdered under the king's orders. And yet the astrologers come back and say, hasn't changed the sign, hasn't changed the future, what you've done. And so what they come to understand is that there had been some exceptions to the rule. People who were closest to the king, they didn't take their wives away, and in their households. That there were some exceptions to the rules, few and far between. But the astrologers say that the astrological signs point to the house of Terach. Terach is one of the king's advisors, that a child is being born to him. And so the king sends them to go get the boy, go get the little boy and bring him to me, and we will kill him. So they get to Terach's house, and Terach has enough administrative authority to send them back and say, not happening. Which, of course, now the king is mad, and he sends them back again on order of the king, right? But in the meantime, Terach tells his wife, take the baby and get out of here. And he replaces the baby with a male slave child that was born in the household. And they brought that child in. That's the child that was taken away to his death. So the baby Avrum, Terach's son Avrum, the baby Avrum is then raised in hiding out in the wilderness area in a cave. He's raised out in a wilderness in a cave, no exposure to society, and he's exposed to nature. And around the time that he's 3 years old, he starts to wonder about the power of the world, the powers of the world. And so, he's looking around and vegetation that grows. We should worship the earth because it has this power, right? But the earth is dependent on the rain. So we should worship the rain because it has the power to create to catalyze the earth to give its growth. But the rain is captured in the clouds, and the wind moves the clouds, and it depends on the sunshine. There's so many factors that this child prodigy comes to an understanding that you can't have a complex world so vast and so complex that doesn't have one master designer. One master designer that's divining the whole thing, guiding the whole thing, right? So with that in mind, he says, okay, that's the one that I will worship, the one I will bow to is the one singular God that has to exist. Now I don't see him, but I see his work.
Yeah.
And in his works, we can see that there is a master planner, a master designer. So he comes to this conclusion on his own, right? He grows older, and at some point, it becomes obvious to the palace that the astrologers were wrong, because the signs are still there, but clearly we've killed all the kids that are around, the boys. So at that point is when Terach's son comes home, because at this point he fits in with the before destruction crowd. He'd be a younger generation, but he'll be of the youngest generation before the decree was made. So they fake his age. They give him a fake ID ahead of his time.
Yeah.
And he's working in Dad's place and helping out Dad. Dad goes off on a business trip. And essentially the story where we know from this time period is that whoever would come into the shop to buy an idol, he would question them, right? So, the story goes, the Medrash tells us about a gal that comes into the store and she wants to buy an idol. She's an older woman. She wants a small, little, simple idol because hers was stolen, right? And so she chooses one. And as he's preparing for the sale, Avram is asking, if these idols couldn't protect themselves from getting stolen, how do you expect this idol to protect you?
Yeah.
And so now she's questioning her logic, or lack thereof, and decides not to purchase and leaves. And this is happening for one customer after another. Another guy comes in and he wants to well, there's more stories. It's bottom line stories, but at the end of the day, Avram goes around and he smashes up all the idols in the shop, except for the largest one. When Dad comes home, he says, "Whoa, what happened?" And he says, "Well, this woman brought in some flour sacrifice, and they all started arguing about who gets it. And the biggest one took a hammer and smashed all the others to pieces." And his father said, "They're brick and stone and metal. That's like, what? You're nuts. What are you talking about? How can they?" He said, "Then why are we worshiping them? Like, come on, right?"
Yeah.
So that didn't go over too well, but time passes. And the next story we're into is that Avram is so Terach's turn comes to do the service in the king's palace, and he brings Avram along to help him out, and they bring wine and bread offerings to all the different idols in the palace, and Avram is encouraging the idols to enjoy, take benefit from it, right? And of course, none of them do, so he just destroys them, right? Now he's gone too far, and Terach is like, "What am I going to do with the kid, And the king sends Avram the king sends his soldiers to grab Avram. Nimrod sends his soldiers to grab Avram, and he brings Avram before the king. And the king says, "Bow down before me." And young Avram is, "No, I bow down. I only bow down and worship the one sole creator of heaven and earth." And Nimrod says, "I'm the one." And he says, "Well, I hadn't heard that. If that's true, so how about like the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west? How about tomorrow you have it change and come from the rise in the west instead of the east? I mean, come on, if you're a guy, you could do that, right? You could change that." And that's not so. It's one test after another. He gives to Nimrod, like, And at some point, Nimrod just gets tired of this kid who is, tearing him down, and he says, "Throw this kid in, build a dungeon, and throw him in a cauldron, throw him in a fire, throw him in a auto de fe, get rid of this kid." And so initially he was thrown in I'm messing up two stories. The first one was throw him in a dungeon, and he's there for about 10 years, and he comes out after 10 years, and the king tests him again, and he hasn't changed. So test number one is realizing there's one God. Test number two is being thrown in prison and being there for 10 years and still not giving up on his faith in a one God. Now he comes the third trial, and this is when he still refuses to bow to King Nimrod. And Nimrod, they go back and forth about different idols, and Avrum is like, pushing him to try and prove things. And finally, Nimrod loses his temper and says, create a furnace and throw him in the furnace. So they make a public auto de fe, public spectacle of this, and they publicize everybody that a traitor is going to be burnt to death, and they all come, and they throw him in, and nothing happens. Right? Essentially, an angel comes before God on high, and he says, "Hey, can we put out these fires?" And God says, "Nope. Just as there is no one in heaven like me, there is no one on earth like Avrum. And so putting out the fire is not sufficient. We'll order the fire not to touch him." So the fire burns the ropes on him without singeing him at all. And Avram spends the next 3 days and nights, hanging out in the furnace, right? And some of the wood sprouts fruit for him to eat while he's there in the furnace, right? And at this point, the word spreads, and everyone comes to see that the person who is in the cauldron and is not being burned in the fires, and they come to see this, and so when he comes out of the furnace, and Nimrod himself admits, "Okay, you got a God that's more powerful than I, and we're going to let this go. So get out of here," right? And it's funny because he has a brother, Haran, and on the whole time Haran has been on the fence about this. He's kind of waiting to see what happens, right? And when he sees it works for Avram, so he says, "Oh, I'm on Avram's side," right? They throw him in the fire, it doesn't work because he was not really committed.
Yeah.
And he dies right there. So he loses Avram loses his brother, and now has the responsibility of his brother's kids.
Yeah.
So Terach decides it's time to move out of town. We've had enough trouble here. Time to go. Avram marries his niece, Sarai, will later become Sarah, but Sarai, who's 10 years his junior. And he marries her. She is clearly equal to him in righteousness. And in fact, later we will see that she actually surpasses Avram in prophecy. So this is going to come back to us a little bit later, right? So Avram, so Terach takes his son Avram and his new wife, and then he takes Haran's son Lot and his wife, and brings them with, and they move out of town. They get out of town, right? They live out of town for a while. They're living in Haran at this time, and this is a part of Canaan at that time, and they live there for a while. At some point, Avram is about 70 years old now, and he has been God's spokesman all these years. He sets up his tent, and he has people coming and going, and he talks about God, and he's gathering a lot of people that are coming to his faith. And he's 75 years old, and now he gets a message from God. If we're looking in Chumash, we're now starting Parshas Lech Lecha. So Avram is 75 years old, and he now gets a commandment from God. For the first time in his life, he actually gets a direct communication from God. All of this stuff up until now, this has all been an intellectual pursuit. Avram has intellectually understood there's a God in the world, and it's appropriate to worship him and only him, and no one else. So now he gets his prophecy, a direct message from God. Lech lecha me'artzecha me'meladata mecha me'beis avicha, that you should get up and you should leave your land, your home, your birthplace, your father's place, and leave all this behind. And this is the commandment. Now, typically when you travel, it's hard. It's harder to get anything done when you're traveling because there's so many incidentals along the way that when you're home, they all work, right? So Avram is concerned initially about leaving home, and that might dampen his influence on the people he's been able to, because he's over the time of over the past few decades, he's gathered quite a following of people that get him and understand him and follow him and want to follow what he teaches, right? So he's afraid of losing some things, right? So God promises Avram that I will give you wealth and I will grant you the power to bless whomever you wish to bless. I shall make your name famous in the world, and I shall bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. All families of the earth will be blessed in your merit. It's because of you and your descendants that rain and dew will fall for the entire world. So he blesses Avram that the traveling will not affect your influence, but in fact, it's through traveling that the word will spread about your influence. Now, what's interesting is that God says to him that I will make your name famous in the world. But realistically, that's a two-way street, because it is Avram who is making God famous in the world. Avram is God's PR man, right? He's telling everybody about this one God that we knew about in the times of Adam, but between Adam and Noah to Avram, God's been forgotten. He's not even on the map anymore, right? So Avram is the one who, through his traveling and through his steadfastness, everybody's hearing about it, right? So with Avram leaving town, that's a big deal. So there's a massive farewell party, a long farewell party. Lots of people come to shower him with gifts and wealth because his name has become famous. He's the guy who did not burn up when Nimrod tried to kill him, right? And he's the guy who continues to be strong about this one faith and has gathered thousands into his camp. Even Nimrod sends him a gift, and the gift is that of a slave named Eliezer. Eliezer is given as a gift from Nimrod, and he will become a student in the house of Avram, and he will become, obviously, because he's the servant, he's there all the time. Unlike students who get to come to class, he's around Avram all the time. So not only does he learn from what Avram says, but he learns from what Avram does and his mannerisms and everything else, and he becomes the top student of all the others because he has definitely learned from his master, right? So Hashem has told Avram, I'm going to send you to this new land, to a place that I will show you. Now, it's fascinating. What does that mean? Just leave here. I'll tell you on the way. Avram doesn't know if this is like, okay, we're traveling for 3 days. I mean, do I pack, am I packing for a 3-day trip, a week, a month? Like, what's going on, right? Because he doesn't know, every step is a reward. Because he's just going wherever God says. So he's therefore, the faith that he has is that he's going wherever God tells him, and that's the right place to go. And he's not concerned about how long the journey is going to be. He just one day at a time, because it's all in God's hands. And that faith is then rewarded So it was intentional that God didn't tell him where and when, so that this way there'd be a reward for every step along the way. So when he reaches the city of Shechem, which later will be famous for some other misdeeds, Avram decides, Hashem says to Avram, I'm going to be giving this land to your descendants. And Avram builds a mizbeach, an altar, to thank God for all the benefits that he will yet receive. They didn't get anything yet, right now, right? So it's right now, it's just a promise of what's to come. There's nothing granted yet, but that he will be given this land, the land of Canaan. So what happens? He gets to Canaan. This is the fourth trial now. He gets to Canaan, and as soon as he gets there, there's a massive famine. I mean, I've seen kids get distraught because they get a present and there's no batteries, and now they have to wait till the store's opened up to get a battery, right? That's bad enough. No, he comes to Canaan. You're going to inherit this, and your future is going to inherit all your children. And by the way, there's a famine. So the test that he passes is the fact that he doesn't complain. He's fine. That's part of God's plan, and that's what we'll do. Simple as that. Which, I mean, considering how many people get totally bent out of shape because of change of plans that they have to endure, right? This is massive, right? You've been promised the world, and by the way, there's a famine. So Avram understands that he can't stay here, but he doesn't complain. It doesn't deter from the promise that's been given. So he passes that test, right? Now comes the fifth test. So because there's a famine, he is going to go down into Egypt where there is food. So think of the map of that part of the world in your mind, right? So he's going to go down from the land of Canaan, where Israel is today, through the Sinai Peninsula, and he's going to cut across to go into Egypt, right? So that's where he's headed. As they're coming to Egypt, he has in mind the potential dangers that are there. But let's stop for a second. It says, Ma'aseh Ava Siman Labanim. The actions of our forefathers are a lesson for all of the children in the future, right? Everything that happens to Avram happens to the entire Jewish people. In one way or another, everything that goes on, he's preparing the way for all of us. The fact that he goes down into Egypt and then comes out of Egypt with great wealth is the prototype of when the entire Jewish people will go down into Egypt and they will go out with tremendous wealth. So this is all, everything he's doing is prototyping. So as he's going down into Egypt, he's considering, Sarai, as she's known at that time, Sarai is uniquely beautiful. Now, that means a couple of things. Uniquely beautiful is that she was of pale complexion in an area where people were not. And going down now, even into Egypt, how much more so? But additionally, you can see the chen, the grace on a person's face. She's a holy person, and she's a tremendous prophetess. And so as he's heading down there, Avram is not worried about her. She's a saint, and nothing's going to happen to her. God is going to protect her. No worries. Complete faith that she's going to be fine. Him, on the other hand, he doesn't take a lot of stock in himself as being righteous or holy or deserving of any special attention or support. He's doing God's work, but it's a job. It's something he feels compelled to do, but he doesn't feel he has any saving graces per se. And so he's worried that the Egyptians are going to see the beauty of Sarai, and therefore, on account of her, they're going to take his life. And so he asks for her that she should. They're going to put her into a box, a crate, and seal her up, so they don't lay eyes on her, So because if they lay eyes on her and they find out that she's married, then they'll kill him. So now she's eligible. And that's the type of people that live in Egypt anyway. They do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So he tells Sarah, we're going to do this. This will be the plan. And if that doesn't work, and they do see you, at least tell them I'm your brother so they don't kill me. But he was never worried about her because she's a tzedekah. She's wholly righteous. She goes along with the scheme. And in a sense, the fact that she is her brother is they're not, it's an uncle, niece, right? But it's family. So brother, sister, we talk about our brethren, the whole Jewish people, our sisters, the whole Jewish people. So it's not an outright lie, but it's a bit of a stretch there. Anyway, she does get discovered. The soldiers see her. Word spreads to the palace really quickly. Most gorgeous person ever in the world. And so so he hears her, he sends a message to bring her to the palace, and they bring Sarah to the palace, and she says, initially, she has said he's my brother, but now that she's standing in front of Pharaoh, he says, okay, so he's not only my brother, he's also my husband. I'm a married woman. So keep your place, right? And his response is, of course, I'll just take you anyway by force. And at that point is when Sarah, who is a tzedekah, a holy righteous woman, and she's, we're going to see this later, another effect, but in Avram's household, there's a lot of people coming and going, but there's also a lot of malachim, angels of God coming and going as well. And it's just part of the crowd at Avram's place. She now commands protecting angels to strike. She feels threatened, and now that she feels threatened, she commands them to strike. They are at her beck and call because she is a tzedekah. And all of a sudden, everyone is smitten with boils. Open blisters that open up into lesions, and it's very painful, and it's all over the body, and it's not just the Pharaoh, but everyone in his palace, and in fact, people across the nation are now suffering from this. And he's like, whoa, let me go, right? Let's get out of this. And so God speaks to Pharaoh, let me correct myself here. I'm going to check here because I remember the conversation was that Pharaoh was asking, he asked to return Sarai to her husband, but he's like, how is her husband going to believe that I didn't touch her and that he will actually take her back? And the answer is because God tells him that he's a prophet. He knows. He already knows, right? And so he brings, Pharaoh tells his people to bring Sarai back to her husband. And before Avram left, Pharaoh gives him expensive gifts. Part of that is because, the rumor mill will say, she certainly was defiled in Pharaoh's palace. The fact that Pharaoh turns around and gives Avram all these gifts and this tremendous wealth, and essentially people say, well, obviously, who's the mighty one here is actually Avram, and obviously Pharaoh didn't touch her because otherwise he wouldn't be giving all these gifts. He's trying to appease the husband, so obviously there's more to it than this. And in addition to that, Pharaoh realizes what a saintly, godly person Avram and Sarah really are, and therefore he says, better my daughter, the princess Hagar, she should be a servant in the household of Avram than to stay a princess of Egypt. And so he gives over his daughter to be a maid in Avram's household, and that she'll be better off over there. So now we have the move back up to Canaan, Eretz Canaan, and because that which had to be accomplished, Avram going down into Egypt has been accomplished. The famine ends. Avram goes back up to Eretz Canaan, and as he's back up in Eretz Canaan, we have some problems with Lot. Now, Lot is his nephew, the son of the Haran who was killed by Nimrod's fire. So Avram, he's now taking care of him, but he sees that Lot is not of the same ilk as he is himself, and he's not careful with the way he does business. And in particular, the fact is that they both have a lot of livestock, and Avram is careful to muzzle his livestock so that they don't eat from someone else's property while they're transitioning from one place to another. And Lot has no problem with this. He and his shepherds let their animals graze anywhere, anytime, doesn't matter whose property it is. Avram takes him to task, and Lot's response essentially is, well, listen, you don't have any heirs. You have all this fabulous wealth. God has promised you all this land, and you have no heirs, so it's going to come to me anyway, so we already own it, so let them eat. And of course, that's not right. It's not the proper. So he says, no. Avram says, I want you to separate. Your behavior is now impinging upon my lessons to the world. You're a stain on the family, and therefore I'd like you to separate. You go whichever way you want to go, and I'm going to go the other direction. But let's separate. I won't stay too far off. I'll be around to be here for you. But please separate. So Lot decides that the valley of Sodom is a happening place. It's a happening place. And therefore he wants to use his wealth and play his cards there. So he goes off to Sodom and the towns around there, big cities, and he's going to live there. So the fifth trial was the idea of this fourth trial was the famine in Canaan. The fifth trial was Sarah being taken to Pharaoh's court, and Avram maintaining his righteousness in the midst of all of that, and even more so, Sarai maintaining her righteousness. Now we come to the next test. They've separated from Lot. Lot's living in Sodom, and there becomes a revolution. There were fiefdoms or small kingdoms in all over the land. Nimrod was the overall, right? But there were small kingdoms over all the land, and there was a battle where 4 kings waged war against 5, and they 5 kings rebelled against 4 kings, and the 4 kings crushed the rebellion. But in their crushing of the rebellion and taking of all the booty, they took Lot as well. And the giant Og, who we mentioned previously, had been saved in the flood of Noah. So he's been around since Noah's time, even before Noah's time. The giant Og, he has eyes on Sarah. And so therefore he goes to tell Avram, your nephew Lot has been taken prisoner. I know you're going to go help him. And you're going to war against the 4 kings that have already destroyed the rebellion of 5 kings. So they're mightier. And Lot's plan is that Avram will fall in battle and he'll take Sarah. That's his plan. It doesn't work that way. But Avram gathers his armies, and it's interesting because we were talking about the different interpretations of Torah, right? So it says all of Avram's followers went with him, and there was 318. But it uses a plural term. When we actually go into battle, it uses a singular term. So the sages are saying, well, wait a second. How did the plural become singular? How are you referred to 318 as singular? So the Mefarshim say they acted with unity, but there's cause to understand that in reality, those 318 were Eliezer, because the name Eliezer has the numerical value of 318.
Okay.
So really it comes down to Avram and Eliezer going into battle. One of the things we'll find repeated throughout Jewish history is God likes to give you plausible deniability, to think that all things happen within the world of nature, even when he's doing amazing miracles, right? At the same time, God also has a tendency to well, it's not a real miracle if the odds are even. We gotta stake the odds so disproportionate that now everyone goes, whoa, right? So it's Avram and Eliezer against the four kings who have already destroyed the others. We learn here that Avram picked up handfuls of earth, and threw it at the enemy, and it miraculously became spears and arrows in flight and did their damage. And vice versa, Amraphel and the others who fought against him, they would shoot their arrows and spears, and they would crumble to dust in air. So Avram and Eliezer had the power, and by the fact that God was fighting the battle for them, to overcome, to miraculously overcome and win the battle, and to be able to save Lot and bring him home. And Avram, in bringing him home, he takes none of the spoils of war, because he doesn't want the other nations to say they made him wealthy. God made him wealthy. He didn't take anything from anybody else. Those who fought with him, they're welcome to take the wealth. He also took a percentage of everything that came in, and he brought it to the Melchizedek, who at that time was like the Kohen, the high priest of those who actually do serve God. We have a tradition from Noah, because remember, we knew from Noah's time, we knew what we should be doing, right?
Mhm.
Noah's sons, Shem and grandson Avrum, they ran a yeshiva. They ran a study place where they taught the understanding of God's ways from that which had been taught to Adam and to Noah. The things that generation we know were kept at the yeshiva of Shem and Avrum. And Melchizedek was one of those who was the righteous man of the time, who was like the priest of the time. And Avram brought to him the first tithing, the first percentage of giving to the priestly tribe, which was Melchizedek at the time, and sacrifices. And at this point, after all that is over and that test is completed, so now a covenant is made. Now, a covenant, what is a covenant? A covenant, the word is bris. Now, we think of bris milah. We call it a circumcision, right? Bris is a covenant. There's a bris milah, a covenant of the circumcision. This is a different bris. This covenant now is a covenant between the parts. One of the ways that in that generation, that date and time, one of the ways that a covenant would be made between two parties is that they would take sacrificial animals, split them in half, and they would walk between the parts. And that was the sign of the covenant that the two parties were making.
Mm-hmm.
So God now makes a covenant with Avram. And the covenant is that I will be your God, you and your family. And you and your family will remain faithful to one God, which is Hashem. So there's a covenant being made between Avram and God. And they will walk between them. They'll split the karbanos, the sacrifices, and walk between them. Avram walks, and God runs a pillar of fire down through there, and this is the sign of the covenant. But before the covenant is being made, Avram says, "I'm I'm good with the covenant. You're promising me tremendous wealth and a big future, but like, what am I going to do with that if I have no heir? Who's really going to inherit? Like, is it going to be Eliezer, the most faithful servant? I mean, who's going to be the heir to this? Because really, if I don't have my own, right? It's not worth it. It's not a big reward to give me tremendous wealth and prosperity if I have no one to pass it down to." So God says you will have your own son. You will be blessed with your own son. And Avram says, I know enough astrology. I can see in the stars. I'm not destined to have a kid. And God tells him, come out of the tent. Look up at the stars in the heaven. You see limitations when you look at the stars in the heaven and that which is programmed to come down into this world. You, Avram, and your progeny are not subject to the constellations. It's kind of like a friend of mine, when he got engaged, his future father-in-law said, and what are your plans for making a living? And he answers, my father's the chairman of the board. God Almighty, not a problem.
That's good. That's good.
So Avram, he wants to have someone to inherit him. You're not destined to that. And then Avram and Hashem tells him, Jews, your progeny are not constricted to the constellations and that which is programmed. You're above and beyond all of that, and you will have an impact on all of that. Whom you bless, I will bless, and those that curse you, I will curse. You're above and beyond the constellations. Your children will be as numerous as the stars in the heaven. And Avram had faith. He had betachon, and he did not ask for any sign or any verification for this promise from God. They did make a covenant, a two-way covenant. We will worship God, and God will take care of us. And in doing this, they took 3 bullocks, 3 goats, 3 rams, a dove, a turtle dove, and they split them and did the covenant between the parts. But it's not by chance what they took and they sacrificed, because all of these again are a foreshadowing of that which will come in the future. One bullock that is representative of the Yom Kippur bullock that will sacrifice, and one bullock is for the halacha, the Jewish law, about a court that makes a misdecision and regrets it. They bring a bullock, right? So that's one of the ideas. A heifer whose neck is broken, if a man is found dead and murdered. Those are the 3 bullocks are representative of those 3 halachas, right? The 3 goats represent the goat offered on Yom Kippur, lazalzel, the goat offered on the Musaf sacrifice of Yom Kippur, and the goat offered as a sin offering by an individual. And so it is with the rams. There's the Asham ram offering for someone who has sinned. There's an Asham offering of a man who's in doubt of whether or not he did wrong. And then there's a lamb offering as the chukas offering for an individual transgression. So all of these sacrifices that he makes here, again, are foreshadowing of what we will do in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, and the Beis Hamikdash. And it was only when Hashem assured Avram that the Jewish people would never cease to exist on the map of history, even when they would go into exile. So what's the exile about? So God told Avram that in the future, your children will be enslaved in a foreign land for 400 years. And it is there that they will become a nation, and they will go out of there Baruchush Gadol with great wealth. The option was that or an extended stay in Gehenna, and Avram chose, let's go with the exile. But he only chose the exile when he understood from God that you will never cease to exist. Your children will never disappear from the world. You will outlive them all. And so this was the covenant between the parts. And it was now that they've made that covenant that they would also now go into Canaan with a blessing to take over the 10 nations that live in the land of Canaan. And they would be able to take possession of all of Eretz Yisrael, all of the Holy Land. So Sarah understands this whole situation of the blessings. And yet she's still barren. So we're going to stop here, and the next lesson we'll take on from this position of their going back to Eretz Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, the future Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Canaan at that time, and at that point, we're going to see what will be the future fulfillment of the promise of God for Avram to have his own children, and how they would populate the world.